Sadhana Pada. Why did Patanjali begin the Yoga Sutras with a discussion of so advanced a subject as the subtle aspect of consciousness? We may surmise that intellectual standards and spiritual knowledge were then of a higher and more refined level than they are now, and that the inner quest was more accessible to his contemporaries than it is to us. Today, the inner quest and the spiritual heights are difficult to attain, following Patanjali's earlier expositions. We turn, therefore, to this chapter, in which he introduces Kriya Yoga, the yoga of action. Kriya Yoga gives us the practical disciplines needed to scale the spiritual heights. My own feeling is that the 4 padas of the Yoga Sutras describe different disciplines of practice, the qualities or aspects of which vary according to the development of intelligence and refinement of consciousness of each sadhaka. Sadhana is a discipline undertaken in the pursuit of a goal. Abhyasa is repeated practice performed with observation and reflection. Kriya, or action, also implies perfect execution with study and investigation. Therefore, sadhana, abhyasa, and kriya all mean one and the same thing. A sadhaka or practitioner is one who skillfully applies his mind and intelligence in practice toward a spiritual goal. Whether out of compassion for the more intellectually backward people of his time, or else foreseeing the spiritual limitations of our time, Patanjali offers in this chapter a method of practice which begins with the organs of action and the senses of perception. Here he gives those of average intellect the practical means to strive for knowledge and to gather hope and confidence to begin yoga, the quest for self-realization. This chapter involves the sadhaka in the art of refining the body and senses, the visible layers of the soul, working inwards from the gross toward the subtle level. Although Patanjali is held to have been a self-incarnated, immortal being, he must have voluntarily descended to the human level, submitted himself to the joys and sufferings, attachments and aversions, emotional imbalances and intellectual weaknesses of average individuals, and studied human nature from its nadir to its zenith. He guides us from our shortcomings towards emancipation through the devoted practice of yoga. This chapter, which may be happily followed for spiritual benefit by anyone, is his gift to humanity. Kriya Yoga, the yoga of action, has 3 tiers: tapas, swadhyaya, and Ishvara Pranidhana. Tapas means burning desire to practice yoga and intense effort applied to practice. Swadhyaya has 2 aspects: the study of scriptures to gain sacred wisdom, and knowledge of moral and spiritual values, and the study of one's own self, from the body to the inner self. Ishvara Pranidhana is faith in God and surrender to God. This act of surrender teaches humility. When these 3 aspects of Kriya Yoga are followed with zeal and earnestness, life's sufferings are overcome and samadhi is experienced. Sufferings or afflictions, Kleshas. Kleshas, sufferings or afflictions, have five causes: ignorance or lack of wisdom and understanding, that's avidya; pride or egoism, that's asmita; attachment, that's raga; aversion, dvesa; and fear of death and clinging to life, that's abhinivesa. The first two are intellectual defects, the next two emotional, and the last instinctual. They may be hidden, latent, attenuated, or highly active. Avidya, ignorance, or lack of wisdom, is a fertile ground in which afflictions can grow, making one's life a hell. Mistaking the transient for the eternal, the impure for the pure, pain for pleasure, and the pleasures of the world for the bliss of the spirit, constitutes avidya. Identifying the individual ego, that's the I, with the real soul is asmita. It is the false identification of the ego with the seer. Encouraging and gratifying desires is raga. When desires are not gratified, frustration and sorrow give rise to alienation or hate. This is dvesa, aversion. The desire to live forever and to preserve one's individual self is abhinivesa. Freedom from such attachment to life is very difficult for even a wise, erudite, and scholarly person to achieve. If avidya is the mother of afflictions, abhinivesa is its offspring. All our past actions exert their influence and mold our present and future lives. As you sow, so shall you reap. This is the law of karma, the universal law of cause and effect. If our actions are good and virtuous, afflictions will be minimized. Wrong actions will bring sorrow and pain. Actions may bear fruit immediately, later in life, or in lives to come. They determine one's birth, span of life, and the types of experiences to be undergone. When spiritual wisdom dawns, one perceives the tinge of sorrow attached even to pleasure, and from then on shuns both pleasure and pain. However, the fruits of actions continue to entrap ordinary beings. How to minimize afflictions? Patanjali counsels dispassion towards pleasures and pains, and recommends the practice of meditation to attain freedom and beatitude. First, he describes in detail the eightfold path of yoga. Following this path helps one to avoid the dormant, hidden sufferings which may surface when physical health, energy, and mental poise are disturbed. This suggests that the eightfold path of yoga is suitable for the unhealthy as well as for the healthy, enabling all to develop the power to combat physical and mental diseases. Cause of afflictions. The prime cause of afflictions is avidya, the failure to understand the conjunction between the seer and the seen, Purusha and Prakriti. The external world lures the seer towards its pleasures, creating desire. The inevitable non-fulfillment of desires, in turn, creates pain, which suffocates the inner being. Nature and her beauties are there for enjoyment and pleasure, or bhoga. and also for freedom and emancipation, yoga. If we use them indiscriminately, we are bound by the chains of pleasure and pain. A judicious use of them leads to the bliss which is free from pleasure mixed with pain. The twin paths to this goal are practice, abhyasa, the practice of evolution, of going forward, and detachment or renunciation, vairagya, the path of involution, abstaining from the fruits of action and from worldly concerns and engagements. Cosmology of nature. In Sankhya philosophy, the process of evolution and the interaction of spirit and matter, essence and form, are carefully explained. To follow nature's evolution from its subtlest concept to its grossest or most dense manifestation, we must start with root nature, Mula Prakriti. At this phase of its development, nature is infinite, attributeless, and undifferentiated. We may call this phase nominal or alinga, meaning without mark. It can be apprehended only by intuition. It is postulated that the qualities of nature, or gunas, exist in Mula Prakriti in perfect equilibrium. 1/3 sattva, 1/3 rajas, and 1/3 tamas. Root nature evolves into the phenomenal stage called linga, meaning with mark. At this point, a disturbance or redistribution takes place in the gunas, giving nature its turbulent characteristic, which is to say that one quality will always predominate over the other two, though never to their entire exclusion. For example, the proportion might be 7/10 tamas, 2/10 rajas, and 1/10 sattva, or any other disproportionate rate. The first and most subtle stage of the phenomenal universe is Mahat, cosmic intelligence. Mahat is the great principle embodying a spontaneous, motivating force in nature, without subject or object, acting in both creation and dissolution. Nature further evolves into a stage called avishesha, meaning universal or non-specific, which can be understood by the intellect, but not directly perceived by the senses. To this phase belong the subtle characteristics of the 5 elements, which may be equated with the infra-atomic structure of elements. These may be explained at a basic level as the inherent quality of smell in earth, that's prithvi, of taste in water, that's up, of sight or shape in fire, that's tej, of touch in air, that's vayu, and of sound in ether, that's akasha. The I principle is also in this group. The final stage, Vishesha, in which nature is specific and obviously manifest, includes the 5 elements, the 5 senses of perception, that's the ears, eyes, nose, tongue, and skin, the 5 organs of action, that's the arms, legs, mouth, generative and excretory organs, and lastly the mind, or the 11th sense. So in all, there are 24 principles or tattvas of nature, and a 25th, Purusha, Atman or soul. Purusha permeates and transcends nature without belonging to it. When Purusha stirs the other elements into activity, it is the path of evolution. Its withdrawal from nature is the path of involution. If Purusha interacts virtuously with the properties of nature, bliss is experienced. For such a Purusha, Prakriti becomes a heaven. If wrongly experienced, it becomes a hell. Sometimes Purusha may remain indifferent. Yet we know that nature stirs on its own through the mutation of the gunas, but takes a long time to surface. If Purusha gives a helping hand, nature is disciplined to move in the right way, whether on the path of evolution or involution. The 16 principles of the Vishesha stage are the 5 elements, the 5 senses of perception, and 5 organs of action, and the mind. They are definable and distinguishable. At the Avishesha stage, all 5 tanmatras, that is, smell, taste, sight or shape, touch and sound, and ahamkara, the ego, are indistinguishable and indefinable, yet nevertheless entities in themselves. At the material level of creation, tamas is greater than rajas and sattva, whereas at the psychosensory level, rajas and sattva together predominate. The interaction of the gunas with these 16 principles shapes our destiny according to our action. Effectively, our experiences in life derive from the gross manifestations of nature, whether painful or pleasurable, that is, whether manifesting as physical affliction or as art. The delusion that this is the only real level can lead to bondage. But fortunately, the evolutionary or unfolding structure of nature has provided the possibility of involution, which is the return journey to the source. This is achieved by reabsorbing the specific principles into the non-specific, then back into the alinga state, and finally by withdrawing and merging all phenomenal nature back into its nominal root, the unmanifested Mula Prakriti, rather as one might fold up a telescope. At the moment when the seer confronts his own self, the principles of nature have been drawn up into their own primordial root, and remain quietly there without ruffling the serenity of the Purusha. It is sufficient to say here that the involuntary process is achieved by the intervention of discriminating intelligence, and by taming and rebalancing the gunas to their nominal perfect proportions, so that each stage of reabsorption can take place. Yoga shows us how to do this, starting from the most basic manifest level, our own body. Once the principles have been withdrawn into their root, their potential remains dormant, which is why a person in the state of samadhi is, but cannot do. The outward form of nature has folded up like a bird's wings. If the sadhaka does not pursue his sadhana with sufficient zeal, but rests on his laurels, the principles of nature will be reactivated to ill effect. Nature's turbulence will again obscure the light of the Purusha, as the sadhaka is again caught up in the wheel of joy and sorrow. But he who has reached the divine union of Purusha and Prakriti, and then redoubles his efforts, has only Kaivalya before him. Characteristics of Purusha. Purusha, the seer or soul, is absolute pure knowledge. Unlike nature, that's Prakriti, which is subject to change. Purusha is eternal and unchanging. Free from the qualities of nature, it is an absolute knower of everything. The seer is beyond words and indescribable. It is the intelligence, one of nature's sheaths, which enmeshes the seer in the playground of nature and influences and contaminates its purity. As a mirror, when covered with dust, cannot reflect clearly, so the seer, though pure, cannot reflect clearly if the intelligence is clouded. The aspirant who follows the eightfold path of yoga develops discriminative understanding, that's viveka, and learns to use the playground of nature to clear the intelligence and experience the seer. Fulfillment. Everyone has an inborn desire to develop sensitivity and maturity in intelligence. That is why God has provided the principles of nature, so that the seer can commune with them and make the fullest use of them for his intellectual and spiritual growth. Nature is there to serve its master, the seer, Purusha or Atman, the inner being of man. It becomes an obstacle to spiritual enlightenment when used for sensual pleasure. But on the other hand, it can help its master to realize his potential and true stature. It is not the fault of nature if human beings abuse it or fall prey to its temptations. Nature is always ready to oblige, or to remain ineffectual according to our deeds. When we have overcome our intellectual and emotional defects, nature's gifts readily serve us for realization of the soul. Having fulfilled their functions, they withdraw. This true self-realization is the peak of development of intelligence. It must be sustained with uninterrupted awareness in thought, word, and deed. Then the purpose of nature's contact with and withdrawal from the seer are fully understood. All sorrows and hatred are washed away, and everlasting unalloyed peace comes to the seeker. Nature continues to taunt throughout life, with afflictions and uncertainties, those who have no discriminative power and awareness. 7 States of Wisdom. After explaining the functions of nature and of the seer, Patanjali speaks of the 7 states of understanding or wisdom, that's prajna, that emerge from the release of nature's contact with the seer. First, let us identify the 7 corresponding states of ignorance or avidya. The first, smallness, feebleness, insignificance, inferiority, meanness. The second, unsteadiness, fickleness, mutability. The third, living with pains, afflictions, misery, agony. The fourth, living with the association of pain. The fifth, mistaking the perishable body for the self. The sixth, creating conditions for undergoing sorrow. The seventh, believing that union with the soul, yoga, is impossible, and acting as though that were so. The 7 states of wisdom are 1. Knowing that which has to be known. 2. Discarding that which is to be discarded. The third, attaining that which has to be attained. The fourth, doing that which has to be done. The fifth, winning the goal that is to be won. Sixth, freeing the intelligence from the pull of the three gunas of nature. And the seventh, achieving emancipation of the soul so that it shines in its own light. These seven states of wisdom are interpreted as right desire, right reflection, disappearance of memory and mind, experiencing pure sattva or the truth, reality, indifference to praise and blame, reabsorption of phenomenal creation, and living in the vision of the soul. They may be further simplified as 1. Understanding the body within and without. 2. Understanding energy and its uses. 3. Understanding mind. 4. Consistency of will. 5. Awareness of experience. 6. Awareness of pure quintessence, sentiment, and beauty. And 7. Understanding that the individual soul, Jivatman, is a particle of the universal spirit, Paramatman. The Yoga Vashishta correlates this sutra, 11.27, with the 7 stages of individual development. 1. Study and cultivation of the company of wise men. 2. Capacity to solve problems. 3. Development of non-attachment. 4. Dissolution of inherent faults. 5. Working towards the bliss in which a half-sleeping and half-wakeful state is experienced. 6. Experience of a deep sleep state. 7. Attaining a state in which purity, tranquility, and compassion flow out towards others. The 7 frontiers of awareness also correlate with the 5 sheaths or koshas of the body. Consciousness is the 6th, and the inner self the 7th. Patanjali describes the 7 states of awareness as 1. Emerging consciousness, Vyuthana Chitta. 2. Refraining consciousness, Nirodha Chitta. 3. Tranquil consciousness, Santa Chitta. 4. One-pointed consciousness, Ekagra Chitta. 5. Sprouted consciousness, Nirmana Chitta. 6. Rent consciousness, Chidra Chitta. 7. Pure consciousness, Divya Chitta. It is also possible to consider the ethical, physical, physiological, neurological, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual domains as the 7 states of awareness. When one rests on the vision of the soul, divinity is felt in this empirical state. The Yogic disciplines. The yogic disciplines are Yama, meaning restraint, and Niyama, meaning practice or observance. These disciplines channel the energies of the organs of action and the senses of perception in the right direction. Asana, meaning posture, results in balance, stillness of mind, and power to penetrate the intelligence. Through asana, we learn to know the body well and to distinguish between motion and action. Motion excites the mind, while action absorbs it. Pranayama, meaning control of energy through restraint of breath, and Pratyahara, meaning withdrawal of the senses, help the sadhaka to explore his hidden facets and enable him to penetrate the core of his being. Dharana, meaning concentration, dhyana, meaning meditation, and samadhi, meaning total absorption, are the fulfillment of yogic discipline, the essence or natural constituents of yoga. They develop when the other 5 disciplines have been mastered. Actually, all 8 intermingle and interweave to form the whole seamless body of yoga. Yama. There are 5 yamas. Ahimsa, meaning non-violence or non-injury. Satya, meaning truthfulness. Astya, meaning non-stealing. Brahmacharya, meaning continence. And aparigraha, meaning freedom from avarice and non-covetousness, intending no harm in word, thought, or deed, being sincere, honest, and faithful, being careful not to misappropriate another's wealth, being chaste, and not coveting the possessions of others or accepting gifts, are the practices of Yama. It is essential they be observed and followed. They are to be practiced individually and collectively, irrespective of lineage, place, time, condition, or career. The yamas are mighty universal vows, says Patanjali. Effects of Yama. If the sadhaka adheres to the principles of ahimsa, all beings around him abandon their hostile behavior. By observance of satya, spoken words fructify into action. All kinds of treasures are bestowed on him who observes astya. For a brahmachari, meaning a chaste or celibate person, vigor, vitality, energy, and spiritual knowledge flow like a river. One who observes aparigraha will come to know of his past and future lives. Niyama. The 5 niyamas are to be followed not merely as individual, but also as spiritual disciplines. They are Saucha, meaning cleanliness or purity. Santosa, meaning contentment. Tapas, meaning religious fervor. Swadhyaya, meaning the study of the sacred scriptures and of one's own self. And Ishvara Pranidhana, meaning surrender of the self to God. Saucha is of 2 types, external and internal. One's daily bath is external. Asana and Pranayama cleanse one internally. They help to cleanse one's thoughts, words, and actions, and make the body fit for its Lord to dwell in. Santosa brings about a state of cheerfulness and benevolence. Tapas is a burning effort involving purification, self-discipline, and austere practice. It is religiousness or devoutness in the practice of yoga. Tapas purges and purifies the body, senses, and mind. Swadhyaya enlightens the practitioner with the knowledge of his inner immortal being. Ishvara Pranidhana brings the inner being to his creator, the Supreme God. Actually, the observance of Yama brings about Niyama, and the practice of Niyama disciplines one to follow the principles of Yama. For example, non-violence brings purity of thought and deed. Truthfulness leads to contentment. Non-covetousness leads to tapas. Chastity leads to the study of the self, and non-possessiveness to the surrender to God. Similarly, cleanliness leads toward non-violence, and contentment toward truthfulness. Tapas guides one not to misappropriate another's wealth. Study of the self leads towards chastity, and surrender to God frees one from possessiveness. By now the reader is acquainted with the causes of afflictions. Not only do Yama and Niyama help to minimize and uproot them, they are also the firm foundation of spiritual experience. They are the ethical disciplines which show us what must be done and what must be discarded. They are the golden keys to unlock the spiritual gates. Sooner or later, improper use of words, improper thoughts, and wrong actions result in pain. Pain may be self-inflicted, due to fate or heredity, or to imbalance of elements in the body. It may be caused by lust, anger, or greed, indulged in directly, by provocation or by compliancy. The resulting sorrows may be mild, moderate, or intense. The causes of lust, anger, and greed can be countered directly by self-analysis, or subdued by invoking their opposites: balance, poise, peace, and harmony. Because the latter dualistic approach may cause one to hide from the facts, the former is a better approach. The use of analysis, study, and investigation requires courage, strength, and discretion. The evocation of opposite tendencies is not a cure, but a help. The first is a direct method of purification, the second an indirect method of appeasement. Patanjali suggests that both should be followed to speed progress. Asana and its effects. Asana means posture, the positioning of the body as a whole, with the involvement of the mind and soul. Asana has two facets: pose and repose. Pose is the artistic assumption of a position. Reposing in the pose means finding the perfection of a pose and maintaining it, reflecting in it with penetration of the intelligence and with dedication. When the seeker is closer to the soul, the asanas come with instantaneous extension, repose, and poise. In the beginning, effort is required to master the asanas. Effort involves hours, days, months, years, and even several lifetimes of work. When effortful effort in an asana becomes effortless effort, one has mastered that asana. In this way, each asana has to become effortless. While performing the asanas, one has to relax the cells of the brain and activate the cells of the vital organs and of the structural and skeletal body. Then intelligence and consciousness may spread to each and every cell. The conjunction of effort, concentration, and balance in asana forces us to live intensely in the present moment. A rare experience in modern life, this actuality, or being in the present, has both a strengthening and a cleansing effect. Physically, in the rejection of disease; mentally, by ridding our minds of stagnated thoughts or prejudices; and on a very high level, where perception and action become one, by teaching us instantaneous correct action, that is to say, action which does not produce reaction. On that level, we may also expunge the residual effects of past actions. The three origins of pain are eradicated by asana, as we progress from clear vision through right thinking to correct action. To the new student or non-practitioner of yoga, a relentless pursuit of perfection in asana may seem pointless. To advanced students, a teacher teaches a whole asana in relationship to what is happening in a single action. At this subtlest level, when we are able to observe the workings of Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva in one toe, and to adjust the flow of energy in Ida, Pingala, and Shushumna, which are the three principal nadis or energy channels, the macrocosmic order of nature is perceived in even the smallest aspects. And when the student then learns how the minutest modifications of a toe can modify the whole asana, he is observing how the microcosm relates to the whole, and the organic completeness of universal structure is grasped. The whole body is the temple of the soul. It can truly become so if it is kept healthy, clean and pure through the practice of asana. Asana acts as a bridge to unite the body with the mind and the mind with the soul. They lift the sadhaka from the clutches of afflictions and lead him towards disciplined freedom. They help to transform him by guiding his consciousness away from the body towards awareness of the soul. Through asana, the sadhaka comes to know and fully realize the finite body and merge with the infinite, the soul. Then there is neither the known or the unknown, and only then does the asana exist wholly. This is the essence of a perfect asana. Pranayama and its effects. Patanjali states that there must be a progression from asana to pranayama, but does not mention such a progression in the other branches of yoga. He states that pranayama should be attempted only after perfection is attained in asana. This does not mean one asana alone, as it sometimes is suggested. It should be understood why one asana is not sufficient for the study of pranayama. In pranayama, the spine and the spinal muscles are the sources of action, and the lungs are the receiving instruments. They must be trained to open and to extend backwards, forwards, upwards, and outwards, and the spinal muscles straightened, cultured, and toned to create space and stimulate the spinal nerves to draw energy from the breath. Inverted postures, forward bends, back bends, the whole range of postures are therefore essential if we are to derive from pranayama the maximum benefit with the minimum strain. Normal breath flows irregularly, depending on one's environment and emotional state. In the beginning, this irregular flow of breath is controlled by a deliberate process. This control creates ease with the inflow and outflow of the breath. When this ease is attained, the breath must be regulated with attention. This is pranayama. Prana means life force, and ayama means ascension, expansion and extension. Pranayama is the expansion of the life force through control of the breath. In modern terms, prana is equated to bioenergy and works as follows. According to Samkhya and Yoga philosophies, man is composed of 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. The spine is an element of earth and acts as the field for respiration. Distribution and creation of space in the torso is the function of ether. Respiration represents the element of air. The remaining elements, water and fire, are by nature opposed to one another. The practice of pranayama fuses them to produce energy. This energy is called prana, life force, or bioenergy. Ayama means extension, vertical ascension, as well as horizontal expansion and circumferential expansion of the breath, lungs, and rib cage. Pranayama by nature has 3 components: inhalation, exhalation, and retention. They are carefully learned by elongating the breath and prolonging the time of retention according to the elasticity of the torso, the length and depth of breath, and the precision of movements. This pranayama is known as deliberate or sahita pranayama, as one must practice it consciously and continuously in order to learn its rhythm. To inhalation, exhalation, and retention, Patanjali adds one more type of pranayama that is free from deliberate action. This pranayama, being natural and non-deliberate, transcends the sphere of breath, which is modulated by mental volition. It is called Kevala Kumbhaka or Kevala Pranayama. The practice of pranayama removes the veil of ignorance covering the light of intelligence and makes the mind a fit instrument to embark on meditation for the vision of the soul. This is the spiritual quest. Pratyahara. Through the practices of Yama, Niyama, Asana, and Pranayama, the body and its energy are mastered. The next stage, Pratyahara, achieves the conquest of the senses and mind. When the mind becomes ripe for meditation, the senses rest quietly and stop importuning the mind for their gratification. Then the mind, which hitherto acted as a bridge between the senses and the soul, frees itself from the senses and turns toward the soul to enjoy its spiritual heights. This is the effect of disciplines laid out in Sadhana Pada. Pratyahara, the result of the practice of Yama, Niyama, Asana, and Pranayama, forms the foundation for dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Through practice of these 5 stages of yoga, all the layers or sheaths of the self, from the skin to the consciousness, are penetrated, subjugated, and sublimated to enable the soul to diffuse evenly throughout. This is true sadhana.